Hello, everyone. My name is Kaytlynn Powell, and I'm going to be going over what is testamentary capacity. So for general knowledge, testamentary capacity has to do with creating wills. Testators is a person who has made a will. So testamentary capacity is referred to as a testator's competency at the time of executing a will. Testamentary capacity is not focused on the individual's competency, but that they can create a legal and valid will. This capacity does not require as high of a standard and requires sound of mind at time of signing the will. Law determines everyone has this capacity until proven otherwise. Next, we will be going over the legal requirements. So there are 4 attributes the court have as requirements for testamentary capacity. These requirements must be in conjunction with each other at the same time. So that's meaning that you can't display the first attribute in the morning and then try to come back later in the day and display one of the other attributes to sign the will. They all have to occur at the same time when signing the will. And so most states also have a requirement of being 18 years of age. And so the first attribute is that testators must know at the time of making their wills that they are making their wills. And so this is pretty self-explanatory, is that the person has to know who they are when they're making a will for themselves. And the second attribute is that they must know the nature and extent of their property. And so, for example, this could be their personal possessions, financial assets, their salary. This does not require the testator to know every detail about their property, but having very general knowledge. And then the third is that they must know the natural objects of their bounty. And so this is meaning that they must know their heirs, their family members, and beneficiaries of the will. And then the fourth attribute is that they must know the manner in which the wills they are making distribute their property. So this is saying that they must understand who will be receiving their property. And then the next section is going to be talking about mental illness and undue influence. And so mental illness, addiction to alcohol or narcotics does not mean that the testator is deemed testamentary incompetent. And so this is saying that the testator has to be lucid at the time of signing the will. This is a legally binding document, so they have to be competent. And then undue influences is when a third party plays a factor and has heavy influence over the will. And so this could be considered suspicious circumstances. So just considering what that would mean. And next we'll be covering the evaluation of testamentary competency. And so this testamentary capacity is a big factor for will contests. So will contests are when someone is disagreeing with either what they received in the will, or maybe they think that they didn't get something that they needed or were earned to them, or so they contest the will. And so they will contest the testamentary competency of the individual. And so this is typically impacted heavier when the testator is deceased and has a bigger impact. And so this evaluation of the testator is alive. This evaluation is based upon the testator's knowledge of making a will, knowledge of their property, living family members, and relationships with them, and the impact and consequences of property dispersal. So the evaluator will be asking them questions so that they can display their knowledge instead of basically being handed the information. And so they need to be able to go through those 4 attributes and have knowledge of what maybe their salary was, or maybe justification for what property was dispersed to who. This is obviously a lot easier when they're alive. If the testator is deceased, is when it becomes more complicated. And so it requires the evaluator to piece together information from a bunch of different sources. So like it could be health reports, mental health reports, therapists, family members, third parties, close friends, and then being able to piece it all together and try to evaluate if they were of sound mind at that time. This is another reason why a third party has to be there to witness and attest to the capacity at the signing of the will, so that maybe this does not occur. It's also important to note that this evaluation has to focus on the testator at the time the will was made. And so it needs to focus on when they signed it. And so you can't be focusing on maybe they deteriorated quickly after the will was signed. And so that shouldn't be a factor to consider. It needs to be under the understandings of what happened when it was signed. And the section I'm going to be discussing this video by attorney Robert Caprera at Law Talks Moments on YouTube. He discusses testamentary capacity and really humanizing the impacts of wills. So he really talks about how people act in these moments. And so they could be more emotional, or maybe they're having health concerns and so they are acting different. And so it's really considering how humans play a role in this, and can consider how everyone is different. He also discusses personal concerns that happen, and so he really stresses the importance, how important it is to complete a will before incompetency occurs. So if you have a family member that's possibly has like Alzheimer's disease and they're deteriorating quickly, to ensure that the individuals have that before incompetency occurs. This is just to ensure that an individual's will is honored, and not to wait until a disease happens and it's too late to honor their will, because it's important to be able to consider. That's the whole purpose of a will, is so that these testators have control and say over where and who gets what. And so when we talk about will contestments, it could be avoided if before that happens, and when you are competent, you can discuss who and what and why. And so who is getting what property, and maybe there's a reasoning why, so that everyone can be under the understanding before maybe you're deceased. And so it's just important to be able to honor individuals in that moment. And then here are my references that were included in my presentation. Thank you.